Just kidding. No requirements.
Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Madison. This is a community where curious seekers gather to explore spiritual, ethical, and social issues in an accepting and nurturing environment. Unitarian Universalism supports the freedom of conscience of each individual, as together we seek to be a force for good in the world. My name is Karen Rose Gredler, and on behalf of the congregation, I want to extend a special welcome to any visitors who are with us, in addition to those members and friends who are here frequently. We are a welcoming congregation, so whomever you are and wherever you are in your life's journey, we celebrate your presence among us. We trust that today's service will stimulate your mind, touch your heart, and stir your spirit. And now I invite you into a few moments of centering silence for contemplation, meditation, prayer, as we settle in and come fully into this time and place together. And now please rise as you are able for our ingathering hymn, number 360, Here We Have Gathered.
I believe that imagination is stronger than knowledge, that myth is more important than history. I believe that dreams are more powerful than facts, that hope always triumphs over experience, that laughter is the only cure for grief, and I believe that love is stronger than death. And perhaps you would be willing to stand again for the lighting of the chalice. Please join me in the words that are printed in the order of service. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of life shared together. And now would you turn to your neighbor and exchange some friendly greetings with them. Thank you. Howdy do. Nice to see you, Bev. Ron, good to see you. Should have been here at 9.
Now it's on. Thank you. That's Maureen. She's wonderful. She's good at sound, and if I'm not making a sound, she'll come running up here to help me. It was only because I hadn't turned it on. Wasn't that silly? Yeah. We have a wonderful story today to read together, and it's called The Honest to Goodness Truth. And I believe it will all appear right up there magically. Somebody else back there makes that magically happen, maybe Dan. Yeah, this is about a little girl quite a while ago, and it's written by a wonderful children's author named Patricia McKissick. She's won many awards, and she's very special. Libby hurried out the door and down the porch steps. "Did you feed and water old boss?" Mama called from her sewing room window. Libby stopped at the gate. "Yes, Mama," she answered. She was surprised at how easily the lie slipped out of her mouth, like it was greased with warm butter. Mama stopped sewing and came outside. Libby dropped her head and wouldn't look in her mother's eyes. "Are you sure?" Mama asked, real stern-like. "Speak the truth and shame the devil," she said. Libby opened her mouth, but Mama placed a finger in the air as a signal for her to stop. "Libby Louise Sullivan, I'll ask you once more and again, did you feed and water old boss?" Libby's stomach felt like she'd swallowed a handful of chicken feathers. Her eyes commenced to fill with water, and her bottom lip quivered. That ever happened to you when you're confused or afraid? Well, it happens to me sometimes. Then, taking a deep breath and gulping hard, she opened up to her lie. She owned up to her lie. "I was going to do it as soon as I came back from jumping rope with Ruthie Mae." Well, Libby felt a lot better, even though Mama punished her double for not tending to old boss. Libby couldn't play with Ruthie Mae. And for lying, she had to stay on the porch. the whole rest of the day. It was the first time Libby had lied to Mama. And as far as she was concerned, it was going to be the last. From now on, only the truth, she said. All the children from Briarsville were gathered outside the small church, waiting on Sunday school to begin. Everybody was admiring Ruthie Mae's new dress and matching hat when Libby came skipping up. "Morning, everybody. Morning, Ruthie Mae," she spoke all nice. "I like your outfit. It's really pretty, but you've got a hole in your sock." All eyes went from the hat to the dress to the hole. Meanwhile, Libby skipped up the steps and inside the church without ever noticing the hurt on her best friend's face. Service ended, and same as always, Libby asked Ruthie Mae to walk home. "No, no, and no again," Ruthie Mae said and glared at her. Libby was purely surprised. "What did I do?" "You told the world I had a hole in my sock." "It was the truth," Libby said, feeling satisfied. "It was plain mean," replied Ruthie Mae, and she hurried away. Well, Libby looked at the idea from all sides all the way home while she walked there alone. By the time she trudged up her steps, she was still confused. Excuse me. The next morning, Libby joined a group of friends on their way to school. "Did you do your geography homework?" Willie asked Libby. "It was easy," she answered. Sorry. "Not for me," Willie shook his head. "I didn't understand it, so I didn't do it." First thing in class, Libby started waving her hand. "Me, Miss Jackson, me, Miss Jackson." When the teacher called on her, Libby announced, so sorry, "Willie don't got his homework for geography." "Doesn't have his homework," corrected Ms. Jackson. "No, ma'am, he don't." Libby was pleased with herself. Willie gave her an ugly look. "Why'd you tell on me?" he whispered as he headed to Ms. Jackson's desk to explain. With certainty, she whispered back, "All I did was tell it like it is there." And she folded her hands neatly in her lap. "Roz, will you bring me my bottle of water that's in my purse? Sorry, I'm recovering from a cold, and it makes me have to choke every once in a while." Thanks, I'll try not to do that again. Before lunchtime, Libby had told a lot of truths. She reminded everybody how Daisy had forgotten, thank you, her Christmas speech and cried in front of all the parents. She told Charlotta how she'd gotten a spanking for stealing peaches off Ms. Stacy's tree. And the whole class knew that Thomas didn't have lunch money and had to borrow some from Ms. Jackson. That wasn't nice, was it? No. By the time school was out, hardly anyone would talk to her. "Why are y'all so mad at me?" Libby asked as her classmates started home without her. On Libby's way home, she wondered why her stomach felt as fluttery as it did when she told the lie. "I promised Mama I would tell the truth no matter how much it hurt," she reassured herself glumly. "And that's all I done." Before Libby knew it, she was in front of Ms. Tussleberry's vine-covered cottage. The woman was in her rocking chair, gliding back and forth and fanning herself with a hand-folded fan. "How do, Libby Louise?" she called in her sing-song voice. "What's that sad look you're wearing on such a pretty day?" Libby jumped right in with what was bothering her. "Can the truth be wrong?" "Oh, no," Ms. Tussleberry said, fanning faster. "The truth is never wrong. Always tell the truth." "That's what I thought," Libby said, a smile of relief lighting up her face. Ms. Tussleberry leaned over the railing, plucked a blossom from one of the vines that grew all over her yard and up her house. "Don't you like my garden? Isn't it lovely?" Libby thought. Ordinarily, she would have just said yes for fear of sounding sassy. But that wasn't the truth. So polite as you please, she answered, Ms. Tussleberry, truly and honestly, your yard looks like a jungle. Yeah. Well, I declare, Ms. Tussleberry gasped. Don't be mad, Libby pleaded. But it was too late. Ms. Tussleberry rushed inside her house and slammed the door. Even though Mama was busy, she stopped to listen to Libby's problem. I feel something awful. My friends don't like me no more. Anymore, repeated her mother. No, they don't. And just 'cause I told the truth, the girl sighed deeply. Handing her a needle and thread, Mama asked gently, Are you sure they're mad at you for telling the truth? Well, I think so, said Libby. Willie was mad as a hornet when I told Ms. Jackson he didn't have his homework. And Ms. Tussleberry got plenty upset when I said her garden looked like a jungle. Mama smiled. Oh, I see. Then, putting down her work, she told Libby, sometimes the truth is told at the wrong time, or in the wrong way, or for the wrong reasons, and that can be hurtful. But the honest-to-goodness truth is never wrong. Then Mama went back to stitching and pulling and stitching and pulling. Excuse me. Libby walked to the barn to feed and water old Boss, all the time trying to get an understanding of her mother's words. Just then, Virginia Washington sashayed out of the fields and past the barn, come for a final fitting of her wedding dress. As she watched Libby brushing old Boss, Virginia burst into laughter. That old horse is older than black pepper, she said, shaking her head. I doubt you could get $1 for that old flea-ridden swayback. And she flounced off toward the house. Well, don't say those things about old Boss, Libby called after her, throwing her arms around the horse's neck. She knew he wasn't the fine carriage horse he'd been once, but why did Virginia have to rub it in? Now Libby thought back on her own truth-telling, and Mama's words suddenly became crystal clear. The next day, Libby caught up with her friends on the way to school. She told Ruthie Mae, You did have a hole in your sock, but I could have whispered it to you instead of hollering out for everybody to hear. I'm sorry. Ruthie Mae smiled. You finally got it, she said. Libby apologized to Willie, too. I should have let you tell Ms. Jackson about your own homework. It was unfair. Besides, nobody asked me in the first place. That's all right. But hey, he added, do you think you could help me with my geography homework? No problem, said Libby. So then later, she went around talking to all the other victims of her truth-telling. Then there was one more person. That was Ms. Tussleberry. Libby found her neighbor out front, down on all fours, pulling up flowers and snatching up vines by the roots. When Ms. Tussleberry saw her, she wiped her brow with the back of her hand and flagged and flashed a full smile. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings yesterday, Libby said. Libby Louise, you were right. This place has gone completely and uncontrollably wild. But you were so mad at me. Ms. Tussleberry waved a dismissive hand. The truth is often hard to chew, but if it is sweetened with love, then it's a little easier to swallow. Libby really didn't understand, but she picked up a hoe and began helping. Things are looking really pretty good around here, she said. And that was the honest-to-goodness truth. You like that one? It's kind of a nice story, isn't it? So now that I'm sniffing and snorting and coughing and hacking, we will sing you off to summer fun with, what's the song? Gosh. 'Tis a Gift to Be Simple, number 16. Okay? Thank you.
The first reading. Humpty Dumpty appears in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, which was written in 1872, where he discusses semantics and pragmatics with Alice in the following dialogue. "I don't know what you mean by glory," Alice said. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously. "Of course you don't, till I tell you. I meant there's a nice knockdown argument for you." "But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument," Alice objected. "When I use a word," Humpty Dumpty said, in rather a scornful tone, "it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less." "The question is," said Alice, "whether you can make words mean so many different things." "The question is," said Humpty Dumpty, "which is to be the master? That's all." Alice was too much puzzled to say anything. So, after a minute, Humpty Dumpty began again. "They've a temper, some of them, particularly verbs. They're the proudest. Adjectives you can do anything with, but not verbs, however. I can manage the whole lot. Impenetrability, that's what I say."
These are the words of Dr. Rachel Noble, a professor of environmental science. Gone are the days when we simply read our local paper or watch one nightly news program after dinner. We're flooded by information from the internet, social media, and cable TV. Whom can we trust? How do we know if the news we're digesting and redistributing is true? It turns out that what we believe and don't believe is based on a combination of emotion, logic, and memory. That complex cocktail is all housed in our brains. This can be dangerous, leading us down a path of believing information that isn't true. Research has found that people usually gravitate toward news that supports their beliefs and ignore information that challenges their views. This is known as confirmation bias, according to Tagi Charot, a neuroscientist and author of The Influential Mind. It's extremely difficult to open someone to a new idea. Data is not enough. It must be communicated in a way that taps into people's emotions, needs, and desires, Charot says. This helps explain how folks can believe a seemingly questionable story. If it generates an emotional response, stoking fear or reinforcing beliefs, we bite. Advertising experts such as Troy King have known this for years. People buy into something because of an emotional connection, King says. Logic has little to do with it. only Bach, but cheerful Bach. Well, as I have said in this forum before, see if you were paying attention, there are two kinds of people in the world: those who divide people into two groups and those who don't. Keep it simple. But simple isn't easy. I remember vividly Donald Trump's great moment of clarity. Healthcare is complicated. Who knew? 3 umpires sitting in a locker room comparing strategies. First umpire says, some of them strikes and some of them's balls, and I calls them as I sees them. Second ump says, some of them strikes and some of them's balls, and I calls them as they are. Third ump says, some of them strikes and some of them's balls, but they ain't nothing till I calls them. The first ump is a realist, accepting his role and his limitations. The second ump is a fundamentalist. He believes that his calls exactly reflect reality, that his words are true. The third ump is a semanticist, or possibly a UU, who understands that words are human, ambiguity lurks, meanings are shaky, intentions are murky. He knows that the pitch is a ball that passes through an imaginary window. But without that window, there would be no game. My topic, finally, is fundamentalism. Not so much religious fundamentalism, but plain old garden variety fundamentalism. Things are what they are, and our words reflect them. It's simple, as Humpty Dumpty explained to Alice. Things mean exactly what I intend them to mean. Words are powerful. Kids learn this very early. The meaning of no, and mine, and a little later, why. Remember those early classic dialogues? Why? Because. Because why? Because I said so. The basic principle of fundamentalism. It contains the unspoken idea, because it's our house and we're bigger than you are. Yep, it's about power. Fundamentalism is very much a part of my own religious journey, so deeply ingrained in my 16 years of Catholic education, it was invisible to me. When I began my theological studies, I'm guessing that most of my classmates were unconscious fundamentalists as we sat down for our first class in theology, sacred scripture. In the Christian tradition, we were taught that the Bible is inspired by God. Every word is true. The truth was revealed to the sacred writers, passed on by the leaders of the Judeo-Christian community, clergy, teachers, parents, down through the generations. Extracting that truth from the Bible is a little tougher. What many Bible fundamentalists do is piece together bits and pieces that they can understand and feel strongly about, particularly in matters of race and sexual morality. Well, by the end of the first week, the class had divided into 2 groups. The first group said, forget about all this scholarly analysis. We can't learn all that stuff. We're just going to hold on to the simple position. It's the Word of God, and it's all true. A pure fundamentalist position. The second group said, if the Bible is the revealed Word of God, it must be important to learn what those words mean. To give up simplistic, magical notions of inspiration and probe the sources to find that meaning. So what would be a non-fundamentalist way of understanding the Bible? The various books of the Old and New Testament grew out of the history of the Jewish people and represents an interpretation of their experiences based on the fundamental principle of their faith, that Yahweh had chosen them as his people and demanded fidelity to his covenant. The priestly compilers of those experiences did not select them to be pious or edifying. Consider the murderous Cain, the father of the race. Consider Jacob, the hustler, who conned his dim older brother out of his birthright. Consider the adulterous King David, so on. One of the deep assumptions underlying the accounts of the Old and New Testaments is the principle of patriarchy. The so-called religions of the book, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, are desert religions with nomadic roots whose tribes survived on the principle of patriarchy. One man, a sharif, made a decision, that was it. Pack up, we're leaving. Go. Fast, indisputable, efficient. More than that, I think there are deep biological roots for patriarchy, which may explain the fierceness with which its defenders respond to threats. Primatologists distinguish between tournament species, where the male is as much as 50% larger than the female. He is concerned primarily with passing on his own genes to the next generation and has only a transient physical relationship with a female who bears his offspring. Think the great apes, gorillas, baboons, chimps. Their opposite number are called pair bonding species, like bonobos, where the female and male are of equal size, bear equal responsibilities for their offspring, and form stable, monogamous relationships. Of course, Homo sapiens, that's us, are neither one nor the other. Males are typically about 10% larger than females, not biologically disposed to monogamy, are much disposed to establishing rankings by exercising power, physically or symbolically. Think muscle cars and corner offices. Sapiens create social systems in practice that valorize patriarchy as a structuring principle. And because the biological edge of sapiens males is so small, so narrow, the need to defend that edge in the cultural wars is fierce. The passionate response to the Me Too movement is evidence of the widespread experience of women, and not just women, to predatory sexual behaviors, and perhaps worse, to the smug sense of entitlement which has dismissed these behaviors in the past. Excuse me. Boys will be boys. What good is power if you can't exercise it? The assertion of patriarchy is often most obvious in the realm of religious practice. Consider the awkward tangle being experienced by contemporary evangelicals in the current political and cultural scene. As the prominent evangelical pastor Tim Keller recently wrote, evangelical used to denote people who claim the high moral ground. Now, in popular usage, the word is nearly synonymous with hypocrite. So it is little wonder that last year, the Princeton Evangelical Fellowship, an 87-year-old ministry, dropped the E word from its name, becoming the Princeton Christian Fellowship. Too many students had identified the term with conservative political ideology. Indeed, a number of serious evangelicals are distancing themselves from the word for similar reasons. Professors Ron Hesslinger and Christian Tobey also suggest that evangelicals are concerned with the preservation of patriarchy. Many commentators have puzzled about the seeming hypocrisy of those who would see adultery and womanizing as grave sins, and yet ignore these behaviors in their ministers and political leaders. Not actually mentioning any names here. And yet, for those who know the history of evangelicalism in America, this should be no surprise at all. Hesslinger and Tobey insist there are good reasons why we should expect this result. The history and sexual politics of evangelicalism in America fit well with Trumpian attitudes. As it turns out, the idea of evangelical Christianity is rooted in a conception of biblically inspired male dominance and superiority, used as a selling point for the religion spread in the South, and cleverly packaged as family values. The authoritarian dynamic was central to Southern antebellum families. To win Southern hearts, evangelicals buttressed patriarchy, empowering fathers and father figures, looking the other way when they took prerogatives that crossed the moral lines. Catering to Southern values, evangelicalism became one of the predominant forms of religious expression in America. One of the pillars of evangelical Christianity is the perception that evangelicals are outcasts, standing bravely against the evil forces of the world. This is characteristic of a cult because it spawns a group persecution complex that solidifies the community, us against them. As the authors point out, religious outsiders have much to gain from boundary maintenance, often courting outcast status or even persecution to rally the faithful. Well, we know the problems of our society, and they are often interrelated. Economic inequality, race, patriarchy, over-aggressive policing, uncontrolled and technically vulnerable electronic media, fake news, vast expenditures by one-issue lobbyists, ecological disasters happening before our cameras and instruments. Well, make your own list. Nothing on the list is new, but technological changes have intensified the issues. I think a majority of Americans still believe, with various levels of conviction, that the democratic process can address the problems of our nation. UUs are committed to this as one of our founding principles. Finan O'Toole, writing in the Irish Times, and I have to say, where would a guy named Finan O'Toole write but in the Irish Times? Finan O'Toole suggests a darker scenario. The president may be deliberately indifferent to the nuances of politics, but he is skilled and experienced in the process of test marketing, dating back to his early career in marketing himself, planting stories in the gossip pages of the New York tabloids, then confirming or denying them, and then studying the reaction. And he recreated himself in reality TV, where the storylines can be adjusted in response to the ratings. What works? Put something out there, pull it back, adjust based on the response, then go again. Consider the border immigration story. Zero tolerance policy. Blame it on Obama. Blame it on the law. Claim powerlessness. Then act to change the policy. But resist implementation. While the nation reacts in horror, Fox News, which the president watches for validation, reacts with enthusiasm, mocking the images, calling the children actors, the immigrants an infestation. What causes infestations? Vermin. What do you do with vermin? Exterminate them. The ratings affirmed this treatment. O'Toole suggests that the administration is test marketing fascist policies. While the public response to the border policies has been intensely negative, the base is solidly behind the president. As O'Toole points out, Hitler never had the political support of a majority of his people, but was successful in the gradual demonization of the Jews, with the results that we all remember. It's a very ominous observation. So, how can we, as UUs, address these problems? There's a story of the newly elected senator who tells the staff speechwriter that he's cutting back on staff and he doesn't need a speechwriter, but then tells the writer as a last assignment to sketch out his inaugural address. The embittered scribe sits down at his Smith Corona, lists the problems of the state and nation, then writes at the top of the second page, "Okay, Senator, you're on your own." I have the feeling that I've done that to myself. My intention in these reflections is not to condemn fundamentalism, because I think it is natural. It has a childlike directness and clarity. We can see that the earth is flat. We can see that the sun passes across the sky. We can add up the ages of the people in the Bible and arrive at a knowledge, a precise knowledge, of the age of the earth. Do the math. But at some point in the maturing process, we have to recognize that the universe is more complex than we imagine, that human behavior, even our own, is beyond simple explanation. Nor is my intention to condemn patriarchy outright, but to recognize its excesses. Even Pope Francis, a man obviously striving to practice an authentic personal Christianity, has, until recently, remained blind to the inferior status of women in the Catholic Church, has believed and trusted in his fellow bishops in the face of overwhelming evidence of sexual abuse and their denial of it. Nor do I wish to devalue the personal religious experience of evangelicals. The liberating sense of being born again, forgiven, loved, but rather to be alert to the danger of righteousness, its long, bloody contributions in the history of religions. We love stories because they have an end, and at least the implication of meaning. We tell stories to express our understanding of how the world works. When our stories attempt to explain how our world works, we call them myths. When we incorporate them into formalized tellings, rituals, and sacramentalize them, incorporating the physical world into the tellings, they evolve into religions. Since none of us, including Stephen Hawking, have a mind that encompasses everything, our stories have to be inadequate, limited, incomplete. So we don't call the story of our religion truth. We call it our understanding. And we invite others to share that understanding. And we try to grow in our understanding and our practice, reaching in to practice mindfulness, reaching out to deepen our communities, caring, then acting. May it be so. Let's get started on that by collecting our offerings. Thank you.
In addition to your generous monetary gifts, we also appreciate the many gifts of those who help to make our services run smoothly. This morning, our greeter was Corrine Perrin, assisted by Marianne Newman. Our ushers were Elizabeth Barrett, Sam Bates, and Ann Smiley, and I believe Marianne Newman assisted them with that as well. On sound, we have Maureen Friend, who has been our sound operator for both services. So if anyone would like to learn to be a sound operator and sign up in the future, please see Maureen after the service or contact one of the people who coordinates volunteers. Hospitality is being provided by Trudy Carlson and Jeannie Hills. The flowers that are so pretty were provided by Karen Jagger, and Hannah Pinkerton is providing care for the pulpit palms this week. I do not have the name of anyone signed up to do a tour after this service. Is there anyone here who is able to provide a tour? That's okay. If you are very interested in learning more about this building or our historic landmark meeting house, come up to this corner of the front of the building after the service, and I'll watch and see if I can find someone to help you. There's a particular training for tour guides, and I haven't had it, but we'll see if we can find someone to help you if you're interested. Thank you. I'd also like to call your attention to the announcement in your Red Floors insert, which talks about the fact that today we have a training after this service in how you can learn to assist the Community Immigration Law Center. Now, this is something that's been advertised widely in our community. At 12:30, there will be a little lunch served, and then afterward, following that, at 1 o'clock, will be an approximately 1-hour program to provide the training. So if you're interested, please come to that. Okie doke. We join each other each week as a community who gathers with joys and sorrows written on our hearts. In this place, we love and are loved. We forgive and are forgiven. We give and we receive in return. We come together to find strength and common purpose, turning our minds and hearts toward one another, seeking to bring into our circle of concern all who need our love and support. This week, we think particularly of the people of Mount Horeb who have lost children. They've suffered a comparatively large number of suicides in the past 6 months to a year, and we hold them in our hearts as they work on that issue and try to prevent further tragedies. In our book, which is kept outside the door to the auditorium there, we also have a note from Charlotte Wolfe, who wants us to please hold in our hearts her dear friend, Carol Gempler, who was admitted to the hospital after a heart attack and has a diagnosis also of pneumonia. So please hold Carol in your hearts as well. May we remember that we are part of a web of life that makes us one with all humanity, in fact, with all of the universe. May we be grateful for the miracle of life. We share that, and we share the hope that gives us the power to care, to remember, and to love. And now, please rise as you are able for our closing hymn, number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath.
Our task now is to mend our broken world. If religion cannot do that, it is worthless. And what our world needs now is not belief, not certainty, but compassionate action and respect, practically expressed, for the sacred value of all human beings, even our enemies. Our service is over, but please remain for the postlude.